a woman who remembers every single day of her life.
Your jaw drops and you think, this woman ain't faking it.
Soldiers haunted by the one day they can't forget.
About the most horrible things one can imagine in life, they've experienced it.
Scientists penetrating the secrets of our most precious mental ability.
He looked under the microscope and he said, "Oh my gosh."
You're doing great. Keep going up.
Of all the things that our brain does, more important than language is more important than anything else. Because if you don't have memory, you don't care about anything else.
Investigating the mystery of memory.
Funding for the Mystery of Memory is provided by the AstraZeneca Nobel Medicine Initiative.
Memory is everything. It allows you to remember where you were yesterday, what you had for breakfast, whom you talked to last week. Memory is the glue that binds our mental life together. It allows you to have continuity in your life.
But sometimes memory works in ways that are hard to understand. Jill Price is a 43-year-old woman in Los Angeles. If you ask her about any day of her life since she was 12, she can instantly tell you what happened.
Normal people, years go by and things fade. And for me, years go by and they're just as strong. Like right now, we're sitting and we're talking, and I'm totally in the present moment, but I always have a split screen in my head. I always have this loop of memories that are just running, not having to do with anything, just random, nothing in order. They're just always running in my head. If you were to give me a specific date, or if I were reading something and I saw a date, then I can automatically just go back to that day.
Let's say May 14, 2009.
I see it was Thursday. On that night, I was sitting at a red light and somebody crashed into the back of my car. I see as if I were it was actually happening again. Not only do I remember my life, but if something touched me emotionally, it has now become part of my life.
What about Mount St. Helens?
May 18th, 1980.
Beirut bombing.
That was October 22nd, 1983.
And Lockerbie.
December 21st, 1988. When I say this, people are like, oh, I would love to have a memory like that. Well, in some respects, yeah, but to not be able to forget all the bad stuff. Let's take my husband's death. He died 4.5 years ago. It's like it was yesterday. This is my life, and this has reached the deep core of who I am. So it's not a sideshow, it's not a joke, it's very serious. And that's why, I have these doctors who are studying me.
Why did you contact me?
Because I wanted to find somebody who could maybe tell me why I remember everything.
In 2000, hoping to find out why she remembers the way she does, Price contacted James McGaugh, a memory researcher at the University of California at Irvine.
When this subject, Jill Price, first came to us, I had to be skeptical. I mean, that's what science is about.
But with Jill, it's really, frankly, fairly easy. You start to probe her memory, and it's not long before your jaw drops and you think, okay, this woman ain't faking it.
How do you know it's a Monday?
Because I just do. Because I just do.
She's always accurate, always accurate. And how does she do it? She said she does it because she can remember the day. She doesn't calculate it, she just knows what day it is. On one occasion, we asked her to please give us the dates of the last 20 Easters. And she did that with one error and then corrected it. And she's Jewish.
McGaugh and Cahill had never heard or read about anyone with a memory like Price's. But since they started working with her, they've identified and studied 5 other people in the United States with a similar kind of memory.
It began to become clear to us that what we have here is a phenomenon. I like to put it this way. You're looking at a brand new chapter in the book of memory.
McGaugh and Cahill have taken brain scans of Price and the other subjects.
What we've done is to examine the brain scans to see what the structure of the brains of our subjects who have this ability looks like in comparison with controls that do not have this ability. And we have identified some brain regions that are remarkably larger than those of the controls. We're still in the early stages of this, but we have some very promising findings. What would you like to ask me?
When are you going to tell me what's going on in my head? I've been waiting for I've been sitting here for 9 years.
The challenge facing McGaugh is trying to understand what might be happening in a biological organ of unparalleled complexity. The brain is so complex, in fact, that its basic workings were not understood until a little more than a century ago.
What we know today about memory, about the function of the brain, is all based on what people that nobody has ever heard about did.
Two of those people were intellectual adversaries whose painstaking studies opened the door to modern brain science. The story began in 1873 when one of them, an Italian doctor named Camillo Golgi, made an accidental discovery.
He was a country physician. He was an unsophisticated guy, and he was tinkering around in his lab, which happened to be in his kitchen. As the story goes, he mixed up some chemicals and threw a little bit of brain tissue into a jar. Then he came back and he looked at it, and he saw for the first time what individual nerve cells actually look like. He discovered completely by accident a method for staining nerve cells.
Before Golgi, scientists could only see part of a nerve cell, which is also called a neuron. But they couldn't see its long fibers that carry messages to other neurons.
With the Golgi stain, he could see the entire neuron, all the fibers, the long ones, the short ones. So now he could see this three-dimensional appearance of the neuron, which nobody had ever seen.
Golgi thought what he was seeing supported a leading theory about neurons, that they were all physically connected to each other.
The fibers of the neurons all intermingled, and when Golgi looked at this, it looked like a net. If you hung a fisherman's net up on a tree and spread it out, it would look like one giant continuity.
But Golgi's stain had a flaw. When applied to a tissue sample, it only showed a tiny percentage of the neurons that were actually there. The flaw would be remedied by a young Spanish doctor named Santiago Ramon y Cajal, the man who would one day become Golgi's rival. His very first experience seeing neurons with the Golgi stain in 1887 changed the course of his life.
He looked under the microscope at this and he said, "Oh my gosh, this method can solve the greatest problem of our century in neurology. How do nerve cells in the brain interact with each other?"
Cajal figured out how to improve Golgi's method so that he could see a great many more neurons. The 36-year-old doctor got hooked on the brain.
He claimed he worked 15 hours a day, 6 days a week. He dreamed about nerve cells. He was just essentially manic when it came to his work. And so within a period of about 15 years, he looked at every known part of the brain.
To show his fellow scientists what he was seeing through the microscope, Cajal made pen and ink drawings. It was a talent he had first developed during his tumultuous boyhood.
Cajal was essentially, today we'd call him a juvenile delinquent. He was out making slingshots and shooting stones at old ladies. So he actually was a rebel.
He is probably the only Nobel laureate who spent several days in jail when he was 11 years old.
He built a homemade cannon and fired it at a neighbor's garden wall.
Well, the man who was working in that garden took great exception to this, and with Cahal's father's approval, the constable took him off to jail.
As a teenager, Cahal's greatest passion was drawing. His love of art gave his father an idea about how to turn the boy around.
His father was a physician, and he persuaded his son to come and help him teach anatomy to the medical students and to make drawings of the dissections so that they could do a textbook of anatomy in Spanish. And he got interested, as a teenager, actually in medicine, and got a little more serious. And the rest is history.
Cahal's drawings of the stained brain tissue were intricately detailed.
You see a black cell, all of its fibers sticking out here in this light yellow background, and the sharpness, the distinctness, and the beauty of it is just fantastic.
Cahal's voluminous observations led him to conclude that Golgi's net theory was wrong.
He did the same thing Golgi did, and he came to exactly the opposite conclusion of Golgi. Cahal hypothesized that nerve fibers never are continuous with each other. There's a gap between the two of them.
Cahal said there's a clear ending to the cell, and there are special sites of contact, and only at that site of contact does communication occur. Fundamental difference.
Cahal published reams of data which supported his theory, known as the neuron theory. During the 1890s, it began to eclipse Golgi's net theory, which Golgi resented. But in 1906, the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine was awarded jointly to Cahal and Golgi in recognition of both men's contributions. The Stockholm ceremony was the first and only time the two ever met. Golgi spoke first and shocked everyone.
Golgi got up and was pretty in your face to Cahal right at the ceremony, basically saying he's right, Cahal is wrong. And there must have been kind of an awkward feeling in the room at the time.
I can almost hear the audience going, oh, when Golgi stuck to his idea.
But the next day, when Cahal gave his speech, he praised Golgi's contributions and called him his illustrious colleague.
There's no question that Cahal was mad, he was indignant, but I think also Cahal kind of figured, I'm going to win this round. I'm not going to only win the battle, I'm going to win the war.
And he did. Cahal's neuron theory was later proved to be right. It forms the foundation for modern neuroscience.
And so this is really the great discovery of Cahal, is that the communication between nerve cells takes place at this junction between nerve cells called a synapse.
But what actually happened at the synapse to form a memory? Trying to answer that question has been the life's work of neurobiologist Eric Kandel.
When I began, one didn't have the foggiest notion of how memory was stored in the brain. And my work and that of others showed it came, as Cahal had predicted, through changes of synaptic connections.
Kandel's partner in solving the mystery? A snail. Scientific name, Aplysia.
This is a giant marine snail. It is interesting from a neurobiological point of view because it has a very simple nervous system. Its nervous system consists of 20,000 nerve cells. You have 100 billion nerve cells in your brain. So this is a tiny, tiny fraction.
In the 1960s, Kandel began a study of how Aplysia learns and then remembers something simple, to withdraw its gill protectively when something touches it.
And our work in the snail provided the first direct evidence in simple forms of learning that these involve alterations in how nerve cells communicate with one another.
Using techniques Golgi and Cajal could only have dreamed of, Kandel zeroed in on the tiny molecules inside the snail's neurons. He discovered that when the snail remembers something, a sequence of molecular changes takes place that strengthens the chemical connection between neurons. And it turned out that these molecular changes form the basis of memory in almost all animals, including us. In 2000, the importance of that discovery was recognized with the Nobel Prize.
He, more than anyone else, helped convince the field that when you want to talk about memory, you've got to talk about what is it that's going on between neuron 1 and neuron 2 that changes to help lock an experience into the brain.
So right now we have 8 electrodes inside your brain. Okay, they spread all over the brain.
To learn more about how the brain recalls certain experiences, these researchers in Los Angeles are eavesdropping on human neurons. They're working with patients like 19-year-old Leanne Lugo. She has a severe form of epilepsy that can't be controlled with medication, but can be treated surgically. Her doctor is Itzhak Fried.
Tomorrow, we'll be able to take the electrodes out.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, that's what we usually do here. Okay. Here I have patients who have severe epilepsies. They come to me with the hope of being able to cure it surgically. In some of those patients, I have to put electrodes in the brain to find where the faulty circuit is. Now, while those electrodes are there and the patient is awake, why not ask fundamental question about brain function?
So I just remind you, you'll see the short video clips. You just have to look at them.
The electrodes can locate the neurons in Leanne's brain that are causing her seizures, but they can also detect which of her neurons are forming memories.
Niagara Falls, every bit as awe-inspiring as Manhattan's skyline, and every bit a part of New York.
She's asked to view a series of 5-second video clips several times in a row. The electrodes reveal precisely which neurons are firing in response to each clip. Sometimes it's just one neuron.
We are essentially listening to the activity of a single cell. And that cell is telling us something very clearly, that it essentially likes or responds only to a particular situation, to a particular experience.
The team collects data on the firing habits of various neurons. Then, after a few minutes, Leanne is asked to remember what she saw.
Can you tell me what you remember about the clips? What was their content? What were they about? Can you describe them to me?
What the Simpsons, the Jesus on the cross.
Yep.
There's the waterfall.
That's right. That's perfect. Okay.
Fried's data consistently shows that when the brain recalls an event, it fires the very same neurons that it fired when we first experienced it.
We're listening to that particular neuron, which already amazed us, about 20 minutes ago. And suddenly, with just one trial, right there and then, we saw that very cell that was active when the patient saw landing on the moon, that single neuron out of millions of neurons would respond or would fire over and over and over again.
Fried's experiment demonstrates the astonishing memory abilities of the individual neuron.
Okay, in just a minute, I am going to show you some images on this screen. All I need for you to do is to rate them on a scale of 1 to 9 on the keyboard there in terms of...
But to make a memory really last requires strengthening the connections between many neurons. Scientists have discovered one of the main catalysts for doing that.
Why do you remember things? And why do you forget things? The thing that really sculpts memory, the thing that really helps control your memory, is emotion.
Back at the University of California at Irvine, Larry Cahill is researching the effects of emotion on memory. He is continuing work that was first started by his colleague, James McGaugh.
Jim had an insight back in the 50s that in the minutes after you've learned something, it's not fixed yet in your brain. And that means there's a window of opportunity to modulate it, to affect it.
In animal studies, McGaugh discovered that stress hormones like adrenaline, which get released in emotional situations, make memories more durable and lasting.
One of the main predictions of the animal research is that stress hormones, the kind you squirt into your bloodstream, should act in the period right after you've learned something to help fix that memory.
In this experiment, subjects are shown pictures. Then half of them immerse their arms in ice water. The cold temperature makes the body release stress hormones.
Okay, I'd like for you to write down as many.
A week later, when they're asked to recall the pictures, the people who endured the frigid water remember a lot more of them. The reason is that stress hormones strengthen communication between neurons in a tiny part of the brain that plays a critical role in emotion, the amygdala.
So the initial hypothesis was, for which we have now strong support, you get excited, you release adrenaline and cortisol. These two stress hormones are going to activate this region of the brain called the amygdala.
The amygdala helps us remember what to be afraid of, and in that way helps keep us safe. But sometimes the amygdala can hold the rest of the brain hostage. Some events trigger such overwhelming emotions that memories of them can derail our lives. That's what happens to people who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD.
People are haunted by something that happened to them in their past. They might have flashbacks, they think about it when they don't want to, have bad dreams or nightmares. They're always waiting for the other shoe to drop or danger around every corner.
Hey. So you've got, this is the PTSD data set?
Yes, I'm going to show you this.
At Emory University in Atlanta, Carrie Ressler is investigating ways to help the brain overcome the memory of fear.
We know that the patient with post-traumatic stress disorder, that when they remember a trauma, the part of the brain involved with emotion, the amygdala, is more activated in those people than it is with the person who may have experienced the same trauma, but who does not have post-traumatic stress disorder. Their fear system seems to get out of control.
Ressler and his colleagues have been researching a drug that seems to ease the amygdala's grip. This mouse was trained to expect a mild shock when a tone is sounded. Today, there's no shock, but even after several trials, the mouse still keeps freezing in fear when it hears the tone. This mouse got over its fear of the tone much more quickly. It was given a drug called D-cycloserine. It's been used safely for decades to treat tuberculosis. But it's also known to stimulate a receptor in brain cells. It's called the NMDA receptor, and it helps make new connections between memory and emotion.
The NMDA receptor can be thought of as a switch on a cell, and through activation of the NMDA receptor, we now can extinguish those fear memories by associating that former fear memory with a new safe environment.
So Michael came in for his follow-up assessment today, completed treatment. He actually indicated no symptoms of PTSD on the follow-up report. So
Barbara Rothbaum heads a unit at Emory that treats people with fear disorders like phobias and PTSD.
Yes, that was wonderful. When the D-cycloserine finding came out, it was a logical next step.
Rothbaum and her colleagues began a study to see if D-cycloserine might make their current approach to treatment more effective.
Right. Angela, so what I'm going to want you to do in a minute is put on the head-mounted display.
Okay.
And you'll be able to adjust it.
It's called exposure therapy. It seeks to help patients by exposing them to what they're afraid of in a safe environment.
Feel free to adjust it anyway so these...
One way Rothbaum does that is with virtual reality. Angelo Brown, a staff member, is demonstrating how it works.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, huh?
Great.
Rothbaum wanted to find out if D-cycloserine might make virtual reality therapy work faster and better. She began with a study of people who have an extreme fear of heights.
You're doing great. You want to, keep going up.
The results? The patients who took D-cycloserine made much greater progress.
We found 3 months later that those people who received the D-cycloserine were more than twice as likely to go over bridges, to go up elevators, and much less afraid than those who received placebo.
We were thrilled. This is so exciting. If a benign drug, a little bit of virtual reality therapy, can make this big a difference. We don't get that many findings like this in our careers.
Now Rothbaum and Ressler are doing a new study with Iraq veterans who suffer from PTSD.
Unfortunately, from our wars now in Iraq and Afghanistan, estimates are probably that about 20% of the people are going to end up with post-traumatic stress disorder.
By understanding this relatively straightforward disorder that is so very debilitating for people, we can help millions of people who are in great distress to have better lives and more productive lives as a result.
So let's keep it overcast.
I think the future holds great promise for neuroscience. I think it's going to help people to be more who they have the ability to be and not be shackled by their emotions in ways that are destructive.
When you look at the long history of neuroscience, you see every century or two, a genius or two comes along. But I think thinking about the history, it gives you the perspective that you should always be on the lookout for the new way of looking at things.
In neuroscience and psychology, we're proud of the discoveries that have been made. But I think most of us are humbled by the fact that these problems are really very, very difficult, and we really have to use every brain cell that we have and take advantage of every technique that we have to continue to increase the understanding.
We've come an enormous distance. Now, if you ask me how far have we come compared to the goal, modest. I think we're at the edge of an enormous mountain range that we still have to climb. But look, we want the next generation to have some problems to solve, right? There's a long way to go.
Funding for the Mystery of Memory is provided by the AstraZeneca Nobel Medicine Initiative.